So that's just a little bit about me. So I'm from Utah, and this was taken probably about 4 or 5 days ago in Bryan's Head, Utah, because someone in Florida did the same thing during one of their storms. So I guess someone from Utah decided to show them what our winter storms look like. So I'm happy to be here out of the snow. But yeah, it gets cold over there. Um, so anyway, with this presentation, I've kind of designed this for my original target audience was kind of system admins, security admins, or anybody kind of with a small budget within a server infrastructure trying to detect threats inside their own system. So I'm kind of making the assumptions that you have some familiarity with Linux, Apache, MySQL, CLI, mod security, basic HTTP requests, and things like that. So later on, if you want to come back to this, review some of that stuff, be great. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about some controversial stuff. First and foremost, I am not a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. I do not know what's legal. I don't know what you can or cannot do. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some threat detection, and then after that I'm going to talk about counter hacking and some of the laws in the United States. I imagine the laws are not similar here in the EU, but I figured it'd still be interesting to talk about some of the current laws that are happening in the United States when it comes to counter hacking and the Hack Back initiative. Anyway, I am not responsible for anything you do. Don't contribute anything you do to me. I'm just a guy here giving a presentation. So one thing that's always bothered me about security is we are always in a defensive mode. We are always in a state of defending. And it gets very grueling because it seems like it's us versus the world. And for traditional offensive attacking scenarios, it's not the standard strategy. Like if you are in any other situation, the strategy is to be more offensive, to be more assertive, to be more active against your threats. But in security, and especially information security, we are focused mostly on loss prevention. And so what I would say is security really is a fallacy in the fact that we are all loss prevention experts in the information technology realm. And our job is to prevent loss, prevent things from happening, and no amount of money we spend on this system will guarantee the security of the system. So when it comes to security, there's really no definition of what that is. It's just loss prevention and risk management. Additionally, too, I'd like to speak a little bit about obscurity. I think obscurity gets a little bit bad rap, mostly because people use obscurity as their information security program, and I think obscurity is a little bit of like salt. If it's all you're eating, then you're not doing it right. It's just something you sprinkle on top of things to make it a little bit more hidden, a little bit more robust. So let's take an example, right? Who here runs a server with SSH on port 22 open to the world? Or has? All right, good, nobody's doing that. Shouldn't. But if you have, you'll notice that you're going to be scanned a lot. And if you change the port on the server to a higher port or just a different port, the noise goes down drastically. So even though you really haven't changed the security posture of the system, you've reduced your noise by putting in a little bit of obscurity into your system. So that kind of comes down to not being default, not being the same, and being a little bit different will allow you to get out of the noise. Additionally, too, when you come to these things, we don't need to outrun the bear, we need to outrun our friends. So when it comes to offensive security and active defense, our goal isn't really to stop the attacker, it's to just make their life miserable, right? Just as miserable they're making our lives. And if we make it so frustrating to use our systems, to infiltrate our systems, and time-consuming, then they can't get to what they want in a reasonable amount of time, they're going to move on. Because when it comes down to attackers have the same ROI mission as everybody else. They need to get a return on their investment. They need to get a return on their time. They have a limited set of resources. You have a limited set of resources. And your goals are opposed, and so it becomes a battle of who has the most endurance. So when it comes to information technology, I like to equate it to kind of real-time strategy games. I really liked real-time strategy games when I was younger. My favorite was Warcraft 3. I did like StarCraft 2. It was fun, but just hard to get back into that. But I think in the tech industry, we have a habit of turtling. We just get more tech, more technology, more things, more defense. When we're just letting the attackers come in, we're just letting them come to us, and we're not doing anything active against them. So, what is counter-hacking? Counter-hacking is where we take the offensive with our approach. Now, the legality of this is in a high question right now, but there is a bill within the United States that's currently being debated against the active counter-hacking measures, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I always like this XKCD comic, and you can't have an information security talk without an XKCD comic. So, this is something I used to do too as a kid. Is I would say, "I know you're listening, right? Just in case if someone was listening, maybe it'll freak them out to know that I know that they know that I know, right?" So, right now, I believe, again, I'm not a lawyer, that counter-hacking is illegal. I know it's illegal in the United States, and we'll talk about the law that most people cite one of the reasons for not doing counter-hacking. But there are situations where you can implement counter-hacking if you are in control of both the server and the endpoint, if you're trying to discover internal threats or insider threats inside your environment. So if you're executing code on your machines that you already own, that the user's already signed a waiver that they have no rights to privacy, then you kind of open to this opportunity to implement counter-hacking measures to try and detect malicious intent and malicious actions. Again, when you're doing this, you're putting on the zebra suit. You're entering the realm of the attacker as you are being an attacker, and doing so, you are now going into a realm that you're probably not familiar with and you're not equipped to handle. So when we go to do this, we have to think about what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it and what's going to happen if we fail. Again, putting on a zebra suit and playing with lions is probably not the smartest idea. So, this is one of my favorite videos. I'm going to play it for you. This was kind of a fad that happened in America a couple years ago around Halloween, where weird people in Texas, and I don't know if this is real or not, it's probably totally fake, but in the middle of the night, people would dress up as clowns and then try and open people's doors, and they'd have knives, and they try and scare the people inside. I think this is a good analogy for what's happening on servers. When I try and explain things to people, like what threats are we facing, I like to bring up the analogy, we're basically facing clowns with knives that are trying to get into our systems, trying to open our doors, trying to attack whatever service we put up, and they're really not, trying very hard, right? I mean, this guy's just wandering around, he's got a knife, and he's just trying to open doors. He's not trying to pick locks, he's not trying to break break doors. He's just seeing what's open. He goes in this guy's backyard, has his knife, tries the door again, looks inside, tries to scare him. But they're really not doing a whole lot, right? Eventually he gives up and then wanders off. And that's the majority of the threat that's out there, is attackers looking for low-hanging fruit, looking for some way, that open door, or some back door, something somebody forgot, that they can get into and take advantage of. But yeah, this is a really scary fad that happened. I'm glad it died out. This wouldn't happen, I think, in Utah because we have a right to protect our property. So if someone breaks and entering into our property, we have a right to use our guns against them. So I imagine they have something similar in Texas, which I think this is where this was filmed. So this guy's probably risking his life. Because I don't think a court would cite you a fault for shooting someone in the middle of the night with a knife dressed as like a clown, so. Anyway. I really think that's just a good analogy for the threat that we face on our systems every single day. So, what I'm going to be talking about today is a lot of do-it-yourself honeypots. So, who here is familiar with what a honeypot is? Okay, good, majority. So we'll skip over a lot of this real quick. So anyway, for basic detection, is that an emergency? Oh, okay. Should I just keep going? Oh. Is it my audio? Oh, okay. Oops. All right, so we have detection honeypots, where basically we're trying to detect, who's come into our system. That's gotta be me. Okay, going back. Then we have research honeypots, which basically, let's go back. Detection honeypots, so we're just trying to detect when someone's entered our system. And research honeypots, where we are collecting malware samples and trying to figure out what hackers do to try and understand the perspective. So when we implement a threat detection program, we put in honeypots to help us decrease the rate of false positives within our IDS systems and our WAF systems. So honeypots, if implemented correctly, will have low false positives and high successes because you'll put them in places where no one should go. Additionally, too, it'll help train your security team to understand where attackers come from and how they're seeing the system. The con of this is honeypots don't prevent attacks. Additionally, too, if your security team is overstressed and overworked and you set up a honeypot, you've basically just put a vulnerable system on your environment that nobody's watching, that they eventually your attackers might use as a foothold on your network. So it's not something to be done haphazardly. It's something that you want to consider and be active about and make sure you're well staffed to manage and operate. So let's talk about active defense. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my environment I have set up. So the technologies I'm using for my active defense scenario here, I'm using the Elk stack for my log management so I can keep track of everything that's happening on my systems. I'm using Apache with mod security as my WAF firewall so that I can manipulate the traffic, identify traffic, and redirect it to where I want it to go. Additionally, I set up Nginx originally on my proof of concept so that I could reroute web traffic to our honeypot server in the event that I feel that this person is being malicious or this IP address or something, and I want to do more research on what that attacker is trying to do. So this is kind of a little diagram of how I had my proof of concept set up. So I had my normal servers, which have our normal applications set up on them. A honey server, which is another version of our application built in a non-production environment that emulates the environment that I was trying to secure. I set up a counterintelligence server, which is basically just kind of a beef server and other hacker tools that I'd implement within our honeypot system, so that when I hook potential hackers or have them come into our system, that it wasn't exactly a part of our network and I could burn it in the cloud too, which was my idea. So the first thing I set up was a reverse proxy with the mod security set up. And then additionally too, you could use if statements to redirect traffic and match patterns in Apache. I chose to use Nginx to do HTTP header agent checks as well. And so what I would do is in mod security, if I identified a potential threat, if they were potentially logged in our system or using our system as a user, I have a session identifier for them, and then I would take that session identifier and I'd modify their user agent string so they could redirect their traffic. Additionally, to go a little bit further on this, I was looking at doing some browser fingerprinting and other things, but automation tools are usually not going to be running JavaScript, so I didn't look into it too deep. If you wanted to go deeper into browser fingerprinting to identify potential attackers too, that's another area you could look into. Additionally too, another couple of tools that I've been looking into expanding on are Kong and OpenResty. They've got a full kind of programmable interface, and then they've got deep integrations with Lua, so if you wanted to manipulate your web traffic or build modules or get really in depth with how your traffic's flowing to your sites, you can use these tools to get more in depth into that. And OpenResty was kind of cool because it allowed me to use Lua to do integrations within Nginx. So here is the mod security redirect that I would use to send to a honeypot. This request here is basically, it just has an identifier matches. If it does, send the request to the honeypot for analysis. Additionally too, for all the other honey systems, I'm going to also be using failed abandoned IP tables, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So when it comes to your threat detection program, you're going to be setting up honey traps, and we'll be talking about the different types of honey types. So there's honey systems, which are basically dumb systems that you set up, which you can set up like Kippo or some of the other honeypot systems, or you can set up your own system for monitoring, but you got to make sure that you have a lot of monitoring built in and a lot of health checks in that as well. Because if you lose communication with your honey system, that can be dangerous too, because you need to make sure that you're constantly monitoring it and checking it, and you actually have a person going after that. So the honey system is a little bit more advanced. The honey tokens are really awesome. Basically, what you do is you take strings of data, so let's say like fake usernames, fake passwords, fake customers, whatever, you put them in your system at some place, and then you put in regex expressions in your IDS systems and your WAF to look for those strings. And then you tell people in your environment that to never touch these items, and if you see these things come across the wire or come across your system, you know that you have a compromise on your system because there's no reason for anyone to access this fake data. Additionally, you can have honey tables in your database, which are fake tables. If you see queries for these fake tables, you know that you have an attacker fumbling around in your system. I wrote this talk after talking to one of my friends. So I have a friend who works as a pen tester, and he works for one of the bigger American companies. I won't give away which one or who he is, but his goal was to be completely silent. When he'd do his pen tests, if he got caught, he'd get in trouble. It was like the worst day at work if he got caught, especially if it was by like antivirus or something, because he's like, that was the worst day for him. And his boss would get really upset with him. And so I asked him, when is the time can I detect you? Like, how will I know that you're in my system if you're not leaving any fingerprint? And he said, the time that I'm most vulnerable to detection is when I'm floundering around in your system trying to figure out where things are. So when he's scanning, when he's doing reconnaissance, and when he's trying to map the network, that's when he said he's the most vulnerable to detection. And so that's what kind of built this idea of building this. Additionally, too, after that, I came across Paul.com's talk that he did in RSA on 2012 about active defense. And it's kind of sad because I haven't seen him do anything else recently, so a lot of this stuff is kind of pulled from his work as well. And I think that it would be great if people would do more active defense as well. So this is kind of my attempt to try and get people to build active detection programs and be more active in their threat detection. So we have honey domains, which are basically fake domains that attacker might be looking for when they're doing reconnaissance. Fake URLs, fake files. We put files on our system. If we see those files move across or get accessed, then we know we have a problem. We can set up honey ports for scanning inside our internal network, so if we know that these ports get activated or touched, we know that someone is in there that shouldn't be. So what is a honey domain? So how many people work in dev shops? Got a couple. How many people have test URLs or like lab URLs? So usually in a dev shop, you will have your main site, and then you have like test or whatever. And so a lot of developers will set up a lot of test URLs, and pen testers will look for those domains to try and get leverage in systems that are usually not protected as much as a production system would be. And additionally, too, that they'll find that there'll be code in those environments that they can inject into as well. So if you set up fake domains, honey domains, and you look for DNS requests for those domains, then you know that someone's actively trying to come after your system. So this one is a setup of honey ports, and basically a honey port is just a fake TCP IP port on your system. A lot of pre-built honey systems will have these. You can put these on your servers. There's really not a lot to this. It's just a port that when it gets connected to, it sounds an alarm. So you just stand up a service, and then you have IP tables or whatever listening to that service, and then you can have fail to ban running as well, and have fail to ban execute commands when those ports get activated. So the first thing that you're going to think about doing when you set up a honey port is, oh, if someone scans my system, I'll just block them, right? Blocking doesn't really work because you are basically creating a denial of service attack against yourself. So the attacker will say, oh, I got blocked. What happens if I spoof IP addresses or go to these other places and I basically scan their system with all this other false information? It'll block all their users, right? Well, instead of blocking them, let's rate limit them. So this comes down to the whole mentality of, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun my friends. If I can waste the attacker's time, I'm winning. They've wasted my time dealing with their threats. Okay. I'm going to speed this up because I'm a little bit behind. Anyway, we have rate limiting because I want to waste their time. I want to frustrate them. I want them to hate attacking my system as much as I hate defending it from them. Additionally, too, a lot of script kiddies will not change the user agent strings on their hacking tools. So if you just block or rate limit based on user agent string, you can block a lot of hacker tools and other things that come through your system. And then here's just more information on the user agent string and fail to ban. And you can protect against brute force. And so the main thing you want to do in your active defense program is you don't really want to block users because you might have a false positive where you have a legitimate user and you just want to just slow them down, frustrate them, give them annoying error codes, do whatever so that we waste people's time. And if it's a user, you'll usually get a phone call about it and say, hey, this guy's getting this problem. Like, oh, let me go check system. Yeah, that IP address or that session looks like it's triggered this, so let me go turn it off. So these are basically just setting up traps. So if we set up fake URLs or we set up rewrite conditions based on potential threat detection, we can then start responding with random HTTP codes. And this will frustrate pen testers, this will frustrate attackers when they're trying to do something and then they get a 503 or a 501 or a 502, like, oh, maybe I got something, right? So they'll keep trying to hammer the same thing over and over again when it's just random output, random things that are coming across them. Additionally, we have honey URLs. We put detection on those. If someone tries to access these, then we know that they are going to places they shouldn't. We can do IP blocking with mod security. This is something we have on our DCEDO.org site, is our robots.txt, which basically is a list of places that you tell robots on the web to not go. So you put a bunch of places in there where places people should not go, and then if someone goes there, then you redirect them to some random thing. So we talked about kind of the web-based honey URLs and honey domains, so let's talk about the database layer. And so what we're going to do here is basically I just enabled MySQL logging and then query that log for potential tokens. So I'll have basically a regex that goes through and looks for a potential token that'll send me an alert. And this is really basic and really simple so that people get started. Now, additionally, too, you have to be careful with enabling query logging because it will slow your system and your database down. This goes to a file. You could have it go to the MySQL database itself. I've also been looking into proxy SQL to see if I can get regex's detection in there as well. So that's another thing to take into consideration. So here is kind of the same regex. So as things are leaving your network, and this isn't a thing that a lot of security people I think miss, is the data that leaves your system is more important than the data that comes into your system. We've gotten really good as security professionals in preventing things from getting in. We are really bad at letting things out. And so if we have detections on what's leaving, we have honey tokens on what's leaving, we have a better understanding of what's going outside of our network. Additionally, this is just basically a honey file, so I put files that might be interesting to potential hackers, so if they've gained access to a system and they touch this file, I'll know about it. Additionally, inside the honey file, I put honey tokens, like passwords and user accounts, so if they try to use those accounts in other systems, then I'll have detections there as well. All right, so we're going to talk about the Active Cyber Defense Certainty Act. And basically, this is in the United States, this law prevents people from hacking. Basically, this is one of the laws that says you are not supposed to execute code on someone else's system that has what they kind of define as malicious intent, which is kind of the spirit of the law, where you cause damage to a system or cause damage to your reputation or things like that. Oh no, this one, yeah, this one is the this one is the hackback law. So there is another law. The one I was actually talking about was the Section 1030 law, which is the fraud and related activities. So this is what usually prevents people in the United States from hacking back, is that this law says that you're not allowed to execute code on remote systems. So if an attacker attacks you and you attack them back, and then they sue you, they could cite this law and say that you didn't, I did malicious damage, but you did malicious damage to me, and they could have a defamation lawsuit, potentially, in theory. But this law that's coming into practice is basically an attempt by the United States to kind of put ground rules for enabling information security professionals to attack back if they've been attacked. And so to set up what they call beacons, which in this case would be malicious code sitting on your server where if someone were to download it and execute it, you would able to get geolocation and get data exfiltration and potentially delete or encrypt data that is yours that has been stolen. So going back to the clown with knives mentality, Malware Tech posted this and I thought it was just really funny. It's basically the cyber equivalent of shooting someone who's entered your property. So in certain states in the United States, like Utah where I'm from, we have the right, if someone breaks into our house, we have a right to defend ourselves. And so this is kind of the spirit of this law too, is if someone's breaking into our system, we should have the right to attack back and gain back what we lost, potentially, within reason. So the Fraud Act, and these are just kind of a snippet of the case, and you can look at the full law itself, but basically the reason why we can't hack back legally now is the knowing cause of transmission. So if you're knowingly attacking a system to prevent harm, you're committing a crime, according to the 1030 fraud and related activities connected with computers law. The HR 3270 Active Cyber Act, now this one has come back to the Congress, United States this year, which is exciting or scary, depending on how you're looking at it, because this could enable a lot of people that don't know what they're doing to do things that could potentially cause harm as well. But the key things to remember about this are there are exceptions of the use of the technology. Basically, you can't hack back against U.S. government systems. So if the U.S. government hacks you, you can't hack them back. That's in the law. Additionally, too, and what the Section 4 is the exclusion of the 1030 Act, and so they're trying to write the law in a way that if you contact the FBI and you provide grounds and say, we think this threat actor hacked our system, we want to hack back to them, and we provide grounds with this, they're saying you have a 2-year window to go back and go after that threat yourself. Additionally, too, the law defines what they call beacons, which we would probably call malware, where if you have remote code executed on the criminal system, that you can use that code to gather information that you can use to legally prosecute them and attack their systems and gain your data back. And when I mean attack their systems, basically, you're not allowed to damage their systems intentionally, but if you do it accidentally, the law would protect you because you're moving in a noble intention, I guess. Whereas if it was proved to be intentional, like, oh, you blew away the whole server and deleted everything and destroyed everything, the law wouldn't protect you. But if you're like, well, I just encrypted my data and then I found all these other people's data, so I encrypted it so that they didn't have it anymore, that would be allowed within this law, which hasn't passed yet. It's currently in debate right now. So when it comes to hacking back, you're mostly looking at client-side attacks. So what you would be doing in these cases with your active security program is you'd be setting up malicious malware-based client-side attacks on your system and hiding them somewhere within your web directories or something like that. So if you had a directory that was listing files, you could put a Word document, maybe you call it, portal login instructions for, firewall or whatever, and then you put malicious macro malware inside that file so that you can try and get that as close to the threat as possible, because you want to get your attacker to execute that Word document. And so using that malware or that Adobe file or whatever that you would normally see attackers using, you could use that on your system. So if they download it, maybe they're not being as security conscious as you are when you're working with their malware. Like, oh yeah, I want to get in that, and they open it up on their system. You get the code execution. You can then execute your beacon as it's defined, which could gather intel against your potential threat. So there are some things you can do right now the legality of this, again, I don't know. Okay. Is a really simple trick is if the person downloading your file runs the Word document and it has embedded images that are on a website, those embedded images will go, that word itself will go out to your website and give an IP address and give information. So if they're not being careful, not using Tor or VPNs or whatever, they open up your document, you can collect that information and collect maybe the IP address, maybe their location, or some information that way. So this is just an example here that I set up where I just tested it against the latest version of Word. I just basically set up a PHP file or a PHP script that would display an image, and then if something connected to that, I'd collect that information. And so here I can see that the user agent string office tried to connect, and I get the IP address, the request time, and maybe I can get some geolocation on that, and maybe get some data exfiltrated on the person who's trying to attack me. So here, how many people have used Beef? Okay, good. So if you're not familiar with Beef, Beef is basically a JavaScript browser exploitation framework. So if you're looking for insider threats, this is really good, or looking for someone that's going to fake URLs or honey URLs or honey sites, you can set up beef hooks in that. So this works really well for internal threat detection if you have people that are trying to go to places they probably shouldn't. So you set up a beef hook on your fake website, inside your fake system, and so if someone's trying to go to like admin page or whatever, you get a beef hook alert, you get their IP address, and you get a bunch of information about them that you can then use to say, okay, maybe we need to go talk to this person and see what's going on and why they're trying to access this. If someone's using an automated tool, you won't get the beef hook alert because they're not going to be executing JavaScript. So if you're not familiar with Beef, it has some really good tools in it. So if for some reason the attacker decides to bring up their browser and connect to your honey URL or honey site and execute JavaScript, then you can run social engineering exploits against them, do geolocation information. You could do network discovery, maybe trying to discover what other things are in their environment through AJAX calls and things like that through Beef. And just an example of some of the information you can get. So additionally to, you have social engineering toolkit. You can use this in reverse. Instead of an attacker, you can use this as a defender to set up malicious websites. Now, this stuff, I recommend using this as internal threats. I wouldn't set this up externally, just because if someone comes in and uses the Java applet attack vector and they get their system compromised, in the United States, you would technically be breaking the law. But if they're in your internal network and you own both systems and they have a NDA in place and a user license agreement saying that you have no right to privacy, then you're really only just executing code on your own systems in that way. So if one of your own systems get compromised, then you can say, okay, this one system tried to access this other part of our internal network. Again, we can just decide what's going on there. Additionally to Metasploit has some great VBA scripts that you can install malware inside Word files. Additionally to, there was this cool tool that was recently released with Black Hat Asia by Bruce Chenier, which basically allows you to do AV bypass on VBA or malware-based Word documents, so you can insert that inside your system for people to download and execute. So anyway, that is my presentation. Here are my references, and I will post this for review later. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some time for questions. Any questions?
Do you also use tar pits in your environment? Do you also use tar pits in your environment, like Labrea or stuff like that?
I haven't really been using those. My focus on this is just trying to do simple, because a lot of the honey pot stuff gets really complicated, and requires a lot of time investment, right? So my goal with this was to try and create simple, idealistic things that could be implemented and maintained without having a huge, IT team. But I have heard of the tar pit stuff, so.
Thank you.
Further questions? You're actually running this in production with this redirection and
No,
honey?
I've done some proof of concepts, and I've done, well, in production, I've done some internal websites, but I haven't actually put it out on the public yet. But my first goal was just kind of focus on internal threat detection, so internal threat actors, malicious people inside the network, or people that are maybe just curious, just seeing who's poking around on stuff.
Further questions? And thanks a lot.
Thank you.